My 11-year-old daughter came home from school soaking wet, shivering, and confused because her key wouldn't turn in the lock. She spent 5 hours in the pouring rain waiting for someone to open the door. When my mother finally came out, she didn't offer a towel or an apology. She just said, "We have all decided you and your mom don't live here anymore." I didn't shout. I didn't scream. I just looked at her and said, "Understood." And that was the moment everything changed. But to understand why I said that and what happened next, you have to understand the day it all fell apart. It started as just a normal day at work. I'm a nurse, and if you work in healthcare, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was busy, chaotic, the kind of shift that chews you up and spits you out in latex gloves. I didn't know it would be the last normal day I'd have for a long time. We were short-staffed again. Half the unit was out sick with the flu, and the other half was pretending not to be. I'd already been yelled at twice before lunch, once by a patient's family member, who thought shouting would make the medication work faster, and once by a surgeon who seemed to think sarcasm counted as leadership skills. I was running on 3 hours of sleep and a single energy drink that tasted like liquefied metal and regret. I was charting at the station, trying to ignore the headache throbbing behind my eyes when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Normally, I ignore my phone during rounds. We have a strict policy, and honestly, I rarely have the time to check it. But something made me look. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was luck, or maybe it was just that mother's intuition that wakes you up in the middle of the night, before the baby even cries. 6 missed calls. All from Hannah. Hannah is my 11-year-old daughter. She's the quietest, most polite kid you will ever meet, the kind of child who apologizes to furniture if she bumps into it. She doesn't call me at work. She knows the rules. And she never ever calls 6 times in a row unless the world is ending. I stepped into the supply room, shut the door, and hit call back. My hands were shaking slightly. She answered immediately on the first ring. "Mom?" Her voice sounded small and tight, high-pitched, like she was trying desperately not to cry. It's a sound that breaks your heart instantly. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Are you okay?" "My key doesn't work." I frowned, leaning against a stack of saline boxes. "What do you mean it doesn't work? Is it stuck?" "It won't go in," she said, her voice trembling. "I think?" "Mom, I think they changed the lock." "They?" I asked, confused. "Grandma? Aunt Brittany?" "Maybe," she sniffled. I rubbed my forehead, trying to process this. "They wouldn't change the lock without telling me, Hannah. That doesn't make sense. It's probably just stiff from the cold. Is anyone home?" "The cars are in the driveway," she whispered. "Okay," I said, checking the clock. I had another hour before I could even think about asking to leave. "Honey, listen. I can't leave right this second. We are swamped. Go knock on the door. Ring the bell. Keep ringing it. Grandma or Aunt Brittany are probably just in the back and didn't hear you." "I did," she said quietly. "No one's answering. Keep trying. Bang on the door if you have to." "I promise someone will open it soon," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Okay," she said. But her voice didn't sound convinced. When the call ended, I stood there for a moment, staring at the wall of gauze and gloves, telling myself it was nothing. It had to be a mix-up. Maybe the lock was broken. Maybe they were in the shower. I shoved the phone back in my pocket and went back to work, forcing a smile for my patients. 2 hours later, I checked my phone again. 4 more missed calls. And 1 text message that made my blood run cold. "Mom, I think they're in there. Please come." My stomach dropped all the way to the floor. I stepped into the hallway, ignoring the beeping monitors, and called her. She picked up mid-sob, the kind of crying where you can't catch your breath. "Mom, they won't let me in." My voice came out sharper than I meant it to. "Who won't? Who is there?" "Grandma. Aunt Brittany, they came to the door," Hannah choked out. "Grandma opened it a crack and said, 'We don't live here anymore,' and then she closed it." I froze. The hospital sounds around me, the paging system, the squeak of cartwheels faded into a dull buzz. "What did you say?" "She told me to stop knocking." She said I'm being dramatic. I felt something heavy and dark crawl through my chest. It was a mix of panic and pure, unadulterated rage. "Hannah, listen to me carefully. Are you safe? I'm under the porch light. It's freezing. Is it still raining? Yeah. Okay, stay right there. Do not move. I'm leaving now. I didn't ask permission. I didn't fill out a form. I found my supervisor at the nurse's station and said, "My daughter is locked outside. It's a family emergency." He started to argue, opening his mouth to mention the staffing shortage, but one look at my face shut him up. I must have looked like I was ready to burn the building down. 5 minutes later, I was in my car. My scrubs were still damp from sanitizer, and the rain was hitting the windshield in furious streaks. It's a strange thing how quickly your brain can switch from professional to animal. I wasn't a nurse anymore. I wasn't a daughter. I was just a mother driving through a storm, white-knuckled and shaking. Willing the car to go faster out, by the time I pulled into the driveway, it was almost dark. The rain was coming down in sheets now. And there, curled up on the wet concrete of the porch, was my little girl. She had her knees pulled to her chest, her hair soaked through and plastered to her face. Her backpack sat next to her like a loyal dog. I put the car in park and ran to her, grabbing her into my arms. She was freezing. Her skin felt like ice. "I'm sorry," she whispered into my shoulder, shivering violently. "I'm sorry, Mom." Like she had done something wrong. Like this was her fault. "You have nothing to be sorry for," I said, my throat feeling raw and tight. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do." She nodded, trembling against me. Then the porch light flicked on. The front door opened up. My mother stood there. She was holding a glass of white wine, looking warm and dry, like this was a casual social visit. She looked at us huddled in the rain with mild surprise. "Elena," she said, "what are you doing here?" I stood up, keeping one hand on Hannah's shoulder. I stared at her, raindrops dripping from my eyelashes. "You changed the locks?" She sighed, taking a sip of her wine. "We needed privacy." "You locked my daughter out in the rain for 5 hours, I said, my voice dangerously low. "Oh, please." "She's fine." "She's 11, not a toddler," Mom said, tilting her head with that same patronizing look she's had since I was old enough to disagree with her. "We've decided you and Hannah don't live here anymore. It's better this way." Less tension. "Who is we?" I asked. "Brittany and I." "Of course." Behind her, my half-sister Brittany leaned in the doorway, her phone in her hand, fake concern painted across her face. "Mom," Brittany said, her voice dripping with syrup. "Maybe this isn't the best time to talk about it." "Oh, stop," Mom snapped at her, then turned back to me. "It's been coming for a while, Elena. You're an adult. You have a job. You'll manage." I looked past them into the living room. It was warm and golden inside. Brittany's kids, Logan and Grace, were sprawled on the couch watching cartoons. My daughter's favorite blanket, the one with the little daisy she sewed on herself, was folded neatly beside them. They were safe. They were warm. They were eating snacks in the house my father built, and my daughter was shivering in the driveway. Something inside me went very still. It wasn't calm. It was the eye of a hurricane. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't beg them to let us in to get our clothes. I just looked at my mother, then at my sister, and I realized that screaming would give them exactly what they wanted. They wanted the drama. They wanted the breakdown. So I said the only thing they didn't expect. Understood. My mother blinked, her smug smile faltering for a second. "What? You heard me," I said. I turned my back on them. I took Hannah's freezing hand and walked back to the car. I didn't look back as I buckled her in. We drove away without speaking for the first mile. The rain thudded against the roof like static, drowning out the world. I turned up the heat until the vents were blasting hot air. After a while, Hannah whispered, "Are we going to be okay?" I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Of course we are." She nodded, watching the headlights smear across the wet road. Then she asked the question that broke me. "Grandma doesn't like me, does she?" The question hit harder than I expected. I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell her that Grandma loved her, that people just make mistakes. But I couldn't lie to her tonight. Not after she spent 5 hours on a porch realizing the truth for herself. I forced a smile. "Grandma doesn't like anyone, sweetheart. Don't take it personally." She almost smiled. Almost. The silence in the car that night was heavier than the rain. Hannah fell asleep in the passenger seat, her head resting against the cool window, exhausted from the trauma of the day. I kept my eyes on the road, pretending not to replay every word my mother had said. You and your mom don't live here anymore. Because throwing out an 11-year-old is just good housekeeping, right? I wish I could say I was shocked. I wish I could say this was out of character. But when someone has been teaching you who they are for decades, you don't get to be surprised. You just finally have to start believing them. That's when I realized this didn't start tonight. It started years ago. When I was little, there were 4 of us in that house. Me, my mom, my dad, and Brittany, my mother's first daughter. She was 5 years older, 5 times louder, and 10 times more loved. If Brittany sneezed, Mom grabbed tissues and applause. If I sneezed, she told me to do it quietly. My dad was gone most of the time. An overworked hospital doctor, always somewhere between late rounds and early flights to conferences. When he was home, he smelled like antiseptic and coffee. He'd pat my shoulder, tell me I was a good kid, and then pass out in the armchair with his boots still on. I adored him for it anyway. At least he noticed I existed. Mom didn't, unless she needed a target. She called me dramatic when I cried and ungrateful when I didn't. She said I was too sensitive. That was her favorite insult. Brittany could burn the kitchen down, and Mom would laugh about kids being kids. I once dropped a glass of milk and got grounded for 2 days. By the time I was 16. I was so desperate to get out that college looked like salvation. Even community college sounded like Paris to me. I thought distance would fix everything. Spoiler alert, it DOESN single quotes T. And now, driving through the rain with my homeless daughter beside me, I realized I had let myself get pulled back into their web. But this time, it was different. This time, they hadn't just hurt me. They had hurt Hannah. And that was a mistake they were going to regret. Because they forgot one very important detail about that house. A detail that was going to change everything. When I met Hannah's father, I was 19, naive and desperate for someone to look at me like I mattered. I mistook attention for love. He was older, charming in a used car salesman kind of way, and I had the self-esteem of a houseplant. He bought me flowers once, so obviously I decided he was my soulmate. A year later, I was pregnant. 2 years after that, he was gone. It ended the way cheap magic tricks do, suddenly, and with everyone pretending to be surprised. He got a job in another state, or maybe he found another bar stool to warm. I stopped keeping track. What I remember most isn't the heartbreak, it was the panic. I remember sitting in my tiny kitchen with a positive pregnancy test in one hand and a half-written nursing school application in the other, wondering how on earth I was supposed to do both. Turns out you just do. You work until your bones ache. You sleep in 4-hour increments. You learn that crying in the break room counts as self-care and that tired eventually becomes part of your personality. But we managed. Hannah and I had a small apartment stacked with medical journals and unpaid bills. Life was held together with takeout, overtime, and a lot of hope. We weren't exactly happy, but we were free. And for a long time, that was close enough. Then, 3 years ago, everything shifted. My dad retired. He had spent his life saving strangers in the ER. Missing birthdays and school plays, but now he wanted to save time. He called me one afternoon out of the blue and said he wanted to visit. He wanted to catch up to make up for the lost years. And the crazy thing is, he actually did. He showed up every week with takeout and stories about impossible patients and miracle recoveries. Hannah adored him. He adored her back. They had the same quiet way of watching people, like they were cataloging every secret in the room. Mom didn't like it. Every visit reminded her that I existed, and worse, that her husband actually liked me. But she tolerated it because it kept him out of her hair. Then he got sick. I won't name the disease. You don't need the medical term to feel the weight of it. All you need to know is that it came fast, and it didn't leave. Mom called me one night, her voice trembling in that way she thinks sounds fragile and tragic. He needs help, Elena. You're a nurse. Translation. Come fix this. So Hannah and I gave up our apartment and moved in. I told myself it was temporary. Just until he got better or worse. Those 2 years were the only time that house ever felt like a home to me. Dad was kind, grateful, and soft in a way he never had been when I was a child. I ran the place like a small hospital ward. I managed the charts, the pills, the meals. And the orders.mom, on the other hand, floated around acting like Florence Nightingale, except her uniform was white wine and denial. When Brittany visited with her husband Ryan and their kids, Mom lit up like the 4th of July. She threw dinner parties that looked more like auditions for sainthood, telling everyone how hard we were working. But the moment the guests left, the lights went out again. She wouldn't empty a bedpan, but she'd certainly cry about how heavy it was to carry the emotional burden. 3 weeks ago, Dad's body finally gave up. The funeral flowers hadn't even wilted when the house started to change. Grief does strange things to people. Some fall apart. My mom redecorated. 3 days after the funeral, she was already moving furniture, humming to herself, calling it fresh energy. She started with Dad's room. She painted it a pale, sickly yellow, changed the heavy curtains, and moved out all his books, the ones he had spent a lifetime collecting. She said it would make a perfect space for when Brittany and the kids visited. Within a week, it looked like a showroom. New bunk beds, toys, framed photos of Logan and Grace on the dresser. Not one photo of Dad, not even one. I remember standing in the doorway, still wearing my black dress, watching her roll paint onto the walls like nothing had happened. She looked happy, energized. She looked like someone setting up for a holiday. Instead of dismantling a 30-year marriage, I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask how she could erase him so fast. But she beat me to it. Brittany and Ryan might come stay next weekend, she said, not even looking at me. The kids shouldn't have to cram into the guest room anymore. They'll need their own space. She smiled like she was explaining something sensible to a slow child. I nodded, because what else do you do when your mother is turning grief into a renovation project? After that, the visits blurred together. Brittany's family was there almost every weekend. They had their own keys, their own laughter echoing through rooms that used to belong to my father. And somehow, Hannah and I, who actually lived there, who had scrubbed the floors and administered the morphine, started to feel like the guest.mom called it healing. She said having the family together made the house feel alive again. Meanwhile, Hannah and I stayed in the smallest room down the hall, our beds pressed against opposite walls. Mom called it cozy. I called it claustrophobic. One night, about a week before the locks changed, I overheard Mom in the kitchen. She was whispering to Brittany, voices hushed over the clink of wine glasses. Rent is outrageous these days, Mom was saying. It just makes sense for you and Ryan to live here full-time. We'd all save money. Then, quieter. Besides, Elena probably won't stay much longer. She was only here for your father. I stood in the hallway, holding a mug of tea that suddenly tasted like metal. It hadn't even been a month since the funeral, and already I was being erased. Just like Dad's books. Just like the paint on the walls. When I confronted her the next morning, she smiled that tight, condescending smile. You said you were just here to help your father, she said, shrugging. He's gone now. You have your job, your own life. It's time to move on. Move on. Like grief was a lease and my time was up. That afternoon I received a call from Jonathan Wells, the lawyer who handled Dad's affairs. Just some paperwork to finalize, he said. I drove to his office expecting insurance forms. Maybe a small check to cover funeral costs. Instead, he sat me down in a leather chair and handed me a thick blue folder. Your father placed the house in a living trust 5 years ago, he explained. His voice calm and professional. I blinked, confused. What does that mean? It means the house didn't go to your mother upon his death, he said simply. It went to the trust. He paused, letting the words sink in. And you, Elena, are the sole beneficiary and the trustee. The room went silent. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. The house is yours, he said. He transferred it before his death to ensure it wouldn't be subject to probate or your mother's whims. Your mother isn't listed anywhere on the deed. She has a right to live there only with your permission. The words didn't register right away. When they did, all I could think was how fast everything had shifted. 3 weeks from eulogies to eviction threats, and now this. I thanked him, took the papers, and drove home with them on the passenger seat unopened. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Because how do you walk into a house full of your sister's laughter and say, actually all of this is mine? I thought I'd be gracious. I thought I'd wait for the right time. Let her grieve. Let her calm down. I thought if I was patient, if I was kind, She might treat me like a daughter, but 5 days later she changed the locks. She didn't care about patience. She didn't care about kindness. She took my silence for weakness, and she made her move. I didn't sleep the night after the lockout. We stayed at a friend's apartment, Hannah on the couch, me in a sleeping bag on the floor. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Hannah curled on the wet porch, shivering. I saw my mother's face, smug and superior, holding that glass of wine up by sunrise. The adrenaline had turned into something steadier, rage with a plan. I made 2 calls before my coffee went cold. One to the hospital to take a few days off. The other to Jonathan Wells. He picked up on the second ring. "Elena?" he said, sounding surprised. "Everything okay?" "She changed the locks," I told him. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Your mother?" "She's not my mother right now," I said. "She locked my 11-year-old daughter out in the rain for 5 hours. She told us we don't live there anymore." There was a pause on the line. Then the sound of paper rustling. "Do you have access to the trust documents?" "They're in my car." "Good, bring them." "Come now." His office was 10 minutes away. Not months, not a lifetime. Just 10 minutes and 1 red light. Jonathan looked calm in the way only people paid by the hour can manage. "This is straightforward," he said, scanning the pages I had slapped onto his desk. "The property is in the trust. You are the trustee. She has no legal standing to change the locks, let alone evict you. In fact, by denying you access, she's the one breaking the law." "Then fix it," I said. "I'll draft the notice to quit," he said. "We can serve her with a formal demand for possession." "How soon do you want this done?" He checked his watch. "Give me 20 minutes. He typed while I stood by the window, watching the rain crawl down the glass. It was still gray outside, the same storm that had soaked my daughter yesterday. "Do you want to serve it personally, or shall I?" he asked, hitting print. I laughed once, a harsh sound. "I've had enough doors slammed in my face for 1 lifetime." "You do it." "But I want to be there." He printed, signed, and sealed the document. He handed me a copy. The ink was still wet. "Perfect," I whispered Dot an hour later. We were parked down the street from the house. Same sky, same rain. It felt like the weather was stuck on repeat. Hannah was safe at my friend's place. There was no way I was letting her near the house until the locks were changed back. Jonathan walked up the driveway. A black umbrella open, the envelope tucked securely under his arm. I stayed in the car, engine running, wipers ticking back and forth like a metromom answered almost immediately. Even from 50 feet away, I could read her body language. Impatient, superior. The Queen interrupted. Jonathan spoke. Calm. Professional. He handed her the papers. At first, she didn't even look at them. She just rolled her eyes and said something I couldn't hear, probably telling him to get off her property. Then she glanced at the first line. Her face changed. It wasn't subtle. It crumpled. Brittany appeared behind her, holding a mug like she had just been cast in the drama she secretly hoped for. She snatched the papers from Mom's hand, scanned them, and started shouting. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the finger pointing, the wide gestures. Jonathan didn't flinch. He stood his ground, said something brief, probably a polite translation of "you're trespassing," then turned and walked back to the car. Mom yelled after him. Words lost in the wind. He slid into the passenger seat, closed the door, and shook the rain off his umbrella. "It served," he said. "What did she say?" I asked. "She said it's her house and she's not going anywhere." "Good," I said, putting the car in gear. "Let her stand in my living room and explain that to the sheriff." Jonathan nodded once. "She'd try to fight it." "I'd be disappointed if she didn't. But Elena? You hold all the cards. She's playing a game she lost 5 years ago. She just doesn't know it yet." I watched him disappear into the gray morning before driving off. I kept expecting to feel victory, but all I felt was the weight of exhaustion finally shifting off my chest. It wasn't triumph. It was oxygen. Back at my friend's apartment, Hannah was coloring at the kitchen table. She looked up when I walked in. "Did you talk to him?" she asked. "Yeah. Are we going home soon?" I nodded, serious. "Yes, we are. Grandma's going to be mad." "She's been mad since 1987, I said, forcing a smile. "She survived." Hannah giggled, the first real laugh I'd heard from her in weeks. I decided right then that it was the sound I'd fight for from now on. That night, I couldn't stop replaying the look on my mother's face when she realized the house wasn't hers to rule anymore. For once, she'd opened a door she couldn't slam. I lay awake listening to the rain hit the window, steady and endless. It sounded like patience. It sounded like waiting for the next move, because there would be one. There always is. And I knew my mother wasn't going to pack up her boxes quietly. She was going to burn the place down before she let me have it. But she was forgetting one thing: I wasn't just the daughter she bullied anymore. I was the one with the keys. And I was done knocking. The days following the notice to quit blurred together. It was rain again, lawyers again, and paper again. Jonathan called me that same night, his voice weary but sharp. "She's already hired counsel," he said. "They're fighting it. They're claiming you fabricated the lockout to create a pretext for eviction." "Of course they are," I said, pacing the small kitchen of my friend's apartment. "They also probably allege undue influence over your father regarding the trust, right?" "Verbatim," Jonathan confirmed. "They're throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Because caring for a dying parent is suspicious now. Because spending 2 years sleeping on a cot next to a hospital bed is apparently a master plan for theft, not love. "She's counting on you to fold," Jonathan said. "She thinks you're still the teenager she can bully into silence." "I'm not," I said. "Good, because I'm filing for emergency possession." "But Elena, to make this stick, we need to document the lockout formally." "The police report helps." "You need to file it." I had hesitated on that part. Calling the cops on your own mother feels like crossing a line you can never uncross. But then I remembered Hannah's voice trembling on the phone. "Mom, they won't let me in. I went to the station that morning." I sat under buzzing fluorescent lights that made everyone look gray and tired, and I told a young officer with kind eyes exactly what happened. I told him how my mother locked an 11-year-old outside in a storm. I told him about the 5 hours. I told him about the "we don't live here anymore." He typed everything quietly, the keys clacking like gunshots in the quiet room. Then he stopped, looked up at me, and said 2 words that validated my entire life. "That's neglect." I know," I stammered. "It's also an illegal eviction," he added. "You have residency. She can't just change the locks." He printed the report. I signed it. My hand didn't shake. "You did the right thing," Jonathan said later when I emailed him the file. He attached the police report to the petition for the emergency hearing. The judge signed the order 2 days later. "Fastest justice I've ever seen," Jonathan noted. Judges don't like it when grandmothers endanger children. It tends to cut through the red tape. Mom's lawyer tried to stall. They filed a motion full of bold italics, outraged adjectives, and 0 evidence. They claimed I was unstable, that I had abandoned the property. The court denied it before lunch. Jonathan called again. "The sheriff's office will set an enforcement date. Probably within the week." "Already?" "You want it quick," he said. "This is quick." That night, I sat on the edge of the guest bed. Hannah was already asleep, clutching a stuffed bear that we had rescued from the trunk of my car. "We'll be home soon," I whispered to the dark. She stirred, eyes fluttering open for a second. "Are they still there?" "Who?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Grandma." "And them?" "No," I said, smoothing her hair back. "Not anymore." She nodded, serious like she understood something bigger than any 11-year-old should have to understand. Then she went back to sleep. When the email came with the date and time, it didn't even feel real. Thursday, 10 o'clock. And the words were right there on the screen. Writ of possession. Immediate enforcement. The morning of the eviction, I woke before the alarm, my heart already sprinting in my chest. The sky looked like Nuttall again, gray, restless, heavy. I made coffee so strong it could dissolve a spoon and drank it standing up, staring out the window. Jonathan had emailed the schedule the night before. 10 a.m. Sheriff's Enforcement. Standard procedure. 2 words I'd been waiting for. Standard procedure. Because nothing about my family ever was, I took Hannah to school early. I told her I had errands. She believed me, or maybe she just pretended to. I didn't want her to see this. No child should ever watch people she called family being escorted out by law enforcement. That's a memory you don't scrub out. When I pulled onto the street where I grew up, my stomach twisted into a knot. There were 3 cars in the driveway. Of course, Brittany's massive SUV, Ryan's truck, and Mom's sedan. They were all home. They had gathered the troops for the big show. 2 sheriff's deputies were already at the door when I parked. I stayed near the sidewalk, the rain starting to mist down again, pretending to scroll through my phone like this was someone else's house. Someone else's drama. From inside, voices drifted out, sharp. Familiar. Mom single quotes, voice first high. Offended, the tone she uses when a waiter gets her order wrong. Then Brittany, loud and wailing like she was auditioning for a tragedy. Ryan chimed in with that useless, booming tone men use when they think volume equals authority. One of the deputies knocked again. Firmer this time. A hard thud that echoed down the block. The door flew open. Mom appeared. Her hair was perfect. Her fury was perfected. She pointed a manicured finger at me across the yard like I'd been summoned from hell. She's the one. She yelled, her voice cracking. She forged everything. It's a lie. The deputy didn't even look at me. He looked at the clipboard in his hand. Ma'am, we have a court order. Brittany appeared behind her, holding her phone up horizontally, recording. This is abuse. She screamed at the officers. You can't throw out a widow. We have rights. Ryan muttered something about lawyers and suing the department as he folded his arms across his chest, trying to look intimidating to 2 men with badges and guns. The deputy read the order anyway, calm, steady, bored almost. He explained that they had 15 minutes to collect essential items and vacate the property. 15 minutes? Mom laughed. It was a brutal, ugly sound. You can't be serious. I am, ma'am, the deputy said. If you are not out in 15 minutes, you will be removed for trespassing. They froze. The reality of it finally hit them. This wasn't a debate. This wasn't a family argument where Mom could guilt trip her way to a win. This was the state. They started pacing. I could see them through the open door running back and forth, knocking things over, arguing with each other. Brittany cried harder. Ryan slammed a door. Mom kept repeating, "This is my home. This is my home." Like repetition could turn it into truth. I just stood there, halfway up the walkway, hands deep in my jacket pockets, pretending the rain didn't sting my face. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The silence was louder than anything I could have screamed. When the 15 minutes were up, the first deputy stepped aside for them to pass. Brittany stormed out first, carrying a stack of clothes and 2 framed pictures. One of her kids, and one of Dad photos she had taken from his office. I almost stepped forward. I almost said, "Put that back." Then I remembered, not my circus anymore. Let her have the photo. I had the house. Ryan followed, lugging a box of electronics and glaring at me like he thought I'd enjoy this. He wasn't wrong. Mom was last. She paused on the threshold. She turned toward me, her eyes glassy with something between hate and disbelief. She looked smaller than I remembered, older. "I hope you're proud," she spat. I looked her right in the eye. "I am," she blinked, stunned that the guilt didn't work. She walked past me without another word, clutching her purse like a shield. The deputies closed the door behind her, simple, final. The silence that followed felt unnatural. It was too thick. One deputy walked over and handed me a set of keys. "Ma'am," he said, nodding. "It's yours now. We'll do a perimeter check, but the property is secured." "Thank you," I said. My voice cracked halfway through. "Thank you so much." 3 words heavier than I expected. When their cars finally pulled away, tires spinning on the wet pavement, aggressive to the end, I stood there alone in the drizzle. I stared at the house. It had been a battlefield. It had been a cage. It had been a museum to a man they tried to erase. I went inside. The air smelled like dust and perfume, that cloying, sweet scent Mom wore. Sweet rot. A half-finished glass of wine sat abandoned on the granite counter. A jacket hung over a chair. It looked less like people had lived there and more like they'd vanished mid-scene. I walked through the living room, past the couch where Brittany's kids had sat watching TV while my daughter froze outside. I walked down the hall to Dad's room. It was still yellow. It still looked like a showroom. But it was quiet. I opened the windows one by one. The sound of the rain drifted in, washing out the smell of perfume. For a second, just a second, I thought I heard Dad's voice in the quiet. "You did what you had to, Elena." I wanted to believe him. That evening, I picked up Hannah from school. She climbed into the car, buckling her seatbelt. She saw the boxes in the backseat, our things, finally coming out of storage. "Are we moving again?" she asked, her voice small. "Home," I said. The word felt strange in my mouth. Like something I hadn't used in years. When we walked through the door, the house echoed. It was empty of their noise, their tension. Hannah ran from room to room, touching the walls, running her hand along the banister, claiming territory. "This is ours again," she said, standing in the middle of the living room. "Yeah," I whispered, dropping my keys on the counter. "It always was." It's been 6 months since the eviction. Hannah and I haven't spoken to any of them. No calls, no text, no surprises. I blocked every number. I blocked their emails. Peace looks good on a screen, but it feels even better in real life. I still get updates, though. Small-town gossip doesn't need permission to travel. Jonathan hears things through the legal grapevine. And a nurse I know from the old hospital still lives near Brittany. Apparently. Mom moved in with Brittany and Ryan right after she lost the house. It lasted about a month before things exploded. Mom started reorganizing their house. New curtains. New furniture. New rules. Ryan didn't take it well. They had a huge screaming match in the front yard, and the cops got called again, this time on them. Ryan moved out a week later. Now Mom and Brittany live together, which everyone says is going great if you define great as 2 people, passive-aggressively competing for oxygen in a 2-bedroom condo. Their latest argument actually made it onto Facebook Marketplace comments. Someone screenshotted it and sent it to me. Mom was selling Brittany's old dining set. Brittany replied in the comments, "You don't even own this." Mom replied, "I paid for the house you grew up in." Brittany replied, "You don't live there anymore." Beautiful symmetry. Is for us. We're good. I repainted Dad's room. It's a soft blue now, the color of the ocean. I put his books back on the shelves. Hannah has been helping me in the garden. We planted daisies. She says everything grows faster when you stop shouting at it. The house is quiet. No new locks. No new storms. And best of all, no one has tried to move in. So, what do you think? Did I go too far by evicting my own mother, or did I not go far enough? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Thanks for watching.